The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, somewhere in the jagged mountains of eastern Afghanistan. Raven 6, this is Overwatch. We've lost contact with Patrol Delta 7. Last known position, grid 417923. How copy? Captain Nix Thorne pressed her lips together, studying the tactical display in the dimly lit operations center. The green dots representing her patrol had vanished from the screen 12 minutes ago. In her 5 years of combat operations, she'd learned that 12 minutes of radio silence in hostile territory meant one of two things: complete equipment failure or complete mission failure. Neither option left room for optimism. Copy, Overwatch. Raven 6 has good copy. What's the last transmission from Delta 7? Her voice carried the controlled tension of someone who'd been in this position before, watching dots disappear from screens while real people disappeared from the world. Negative contact for 1-2 minutes. Last transmission was Sergeant Martinez reporting movement in the valley. Then nothing. Nix's fingers drummed against the console. Martinez was solid, a 10-year veteran who didn't spook easily. If he'd gone quiet, something had gone very wrong in that valley. The tactical map showed Delta 7's patrol route threading through a narrow canyon system known locally as the Serpent's Throat, a name that had proven prophetic more than once. Raven 6, be advised, we're showing increased chatter on enemy frequencies. Intel suggests possible ambush scenario. The words hit like ice water. Ambush. The single syllable that transformed routine patrol into nightmare, turned living soldiers into casualty reports. Nix had seen it before: good people walking into carefully prepared kill zones, their final moments marked only by the abrupt silence of dead radios. Outside the operations center, the pre-dawn darkness stretched endlessly across the forward operating base. Somewhere in that darkness, 6 soldiers might be fighting for their lives, or already beyond help. The thought sat heavy in her chest, a familiar weight that never seemed to diminish despite years of carrying it. Raven 6, Command is requesting immediate reconnaissance of Delta 7's last known position. QRF is spinning up, but we need eyes on target before we commit ground assets. Nix's hand moved instinctively to the flight suit hanging beside her chair. The US-60 Black Hawk designated Raven 6 sat on the tarmac outside, her aircraft, her responsibility. In 90 seconds, she could be airborne, racing toward that silent valley where answers waited in the darkness. But something about this felt different. The enemy chatter, the perfect timing, the way Delta 7 had simply vanished without even a distress call. It felt like a trap within a trap, layers of deception designed to draw in exactly what she was about to become: a lone helicopter flying into unknown danger. The radio crackled again, urgent now. Raven 6, how copy? Do you copy reconnaissance request? Her hand closed around the flight suit. Whatever waited in that valley, Delta 7 was out there. That was all that mattered. The first hint of betrayal came disguised as routine intelligence. Major Kellerman's voice carried its usual bureaucratic flatness as he briefed the mission parameters, but Nix caught the subtle tell, the way his eyes avoided hers when discussing extraction protocols. After 4 years of flying together, she'd learned to read the spaces between his words. Primary objective remains reconnaissance and assessment of Delta 7's status, Kellerman continued, his pointer tracing the route on the illuminated map. Secondary objective is to provide overwatch for QRF insertion if casualties are confirmed. The operations center buzzed with controlled activity. Technicians monitored radio frequencies while intelligence analysts parsed intercepted communications. But Nix's attention focused on the mission timeline displayed on the primary screen. Something was wrong with the numbers. The proposed flight path would take her directly over 3 known anti-aircraft positions, information that had been in yesterday's intelligence brief, but was conspicuously absent from today's presentation. Sir, what's the current threat assessment for the northern approach? She kept her voice neutral, professional. Kellerman's hesitation lasted exactly 2 heartbeats too long. Minimal surface-to-air threat. Intel shows enemy assets concentrated in the eastern sectors. The lies settled into the room like smoke. Nix had seen the overnight intelligence reports. The eastern sectors had been quiet for 48 hours, while northern positions had shown increased activity. Someone was painting a false picture, and the implications made her stomach tighten. Raven 6, you're cleared for immediate departure. Weather window is optimal, and we need those eyes on target before first light. She nodded, gathering her gear with practiced efficiency. The M4 carbine felt familiar in her hands, the weight of body armor settling across her shoulders like an old friend. But as she walked toward the flight line, pieces of a larger puzzle began forming in her mind. The convenient timing of Delta 7's disappearance, the rushed mission briefing, the altered intelligence picture. The Black Hawk sat in the pre-dawn darkness, rotors drooping like the wings of a sleeping bird. Her crew chief, Sergeant Williams, performed his pre-flight inspection with meticulous care. The aircraft's dark gray paint absorbed the harsh floods of the flight line, making it appear almost spectral against the concrete. "Birds clean and ready, Captain," Williams reported, his breath visible in the cold air. "Full fuel standard loadout." Nix ran through her own pre-flight routine, checking control surfaces and examining the aircraft's vital systems. The US-60 had been her partner for 18 months, through missions that had tested both machine and pilot to their limits. Its engines, avionics, and weapons systems had never failed her, but tonight she wondered if the real threat would come from the ground or from the very people sending her into danger. The radio crackled in her helmet. "Raven 6 Tower, you're cleared for immediate departure. Fly heading 047, maintain tactical altitude." "Copy Tower, Raven 6 departing." The turbines spooled up with their characteristic whine, building power as the rotors began their steady rotation. Within minutes, the Black Hawk lifted into the darkness, carrying her toward a valley where 6 soldiers waited for help that might never come. The Afghanistan landscape unfolded below like a moonlit map of ancient conflicts. Rocky ridges and deep valleys stretched endlessly in all directions, their shadows hiding secrets that had claimed empires for millennia. Nix flew at tactical altitude, 200 feet above the deck, following terrain features that would mask her approach from enemy radar. The flight to Delta 7's last known position would take 43 minutes. 43 minutes to consider the growing certainty that this mission was not what it appeared to be. The altered intelligence, the rushed timeline, the convenient disappearance of a patrol in an area known for its strategic importance, every element pointed toward a carefully orchestrated deception. Raven 6 Overwatch, radio check. Raven 6 has you 5x5. Copy, be advised, we're showing increased activity on enemy frequencies. Recommend heightened vigilance. The warning carried a hollow ring. If intelligence was already compromised, if someone was feeding information to the enemy, then heightened vigilance would provide little protection against a well-planned ambush. But Nix pressed forward, the Black Hawk's rotors beating steadily through the thin mountain air. 20 minutes into the flight, she spotted the first anomaly. A convoy of vehicles moving along a dirt road that intelligence had reported as abandoned. The vehicles carried no lights, but their heat signatures were clearly visible through her night vision system. 3 trucks, possibly armed, heading toward the same valley where Delta 7 had vanished. Overwatch, Raven 6. I've got movement on the ground. 3 vehicles, possibly hostile, proceeding toward target area. The radio silence stretched longer than necessary. When the response came, it carried a different voice, one she didn't recognize. Raven 6, continue to primary objective. Ground movement is not your concern. The dismissal was too quick, too definitive. In her experience, unexpected ground movement always merited investigation, especially when it coincided with missing patrols and compromised intelligence. But orders were orders, and she was committed to the mission. The valley mouth appeared ahead, a dark gash in the mountainside that local maps called the Serpent's Throat. According to mythology, it was where ancient warriors had been led to their deaths by false promises of easy victory. The parallel to her current situation was not lost on her. As the Black Hawk approached the valley entrance, Nix's threat warning system remained silent. No radar locks, no missile signatures, no indication of anti-aircraft activity. But her instincts screamed warnings that no electronic system could detect. This felt like the calm before a storm, the deceptive peace that preceded violence. The first shots came from positions that intelligence had marked as clear. Muzzle flashes erupted from 3 different ridgelines, tracer rounds streaking through the darkness like deadly fireworks. The distinctive chatter of AK-47s mixed with the heavier reports of machine guns, creating a lethal symphony that echoed off the valley walls. Nix threw the Black Hawk into a steep banking turn, the aircraft's frame groaning under the sudden stress. Taking fire, she transmitted, her voice cutting through the radio static. Multiple positions, small arms and heavy weapons. Raven 6 is taking evasive action. The response from base came too quickly, as if someone had been waiting for this exact moment. Raven 6, abort mission. Return to base immediately. But aborting meant abandoning Delta 7, and that was not an option. Nix dove the helicopter toward the valley floor, using the terrain to mask her approach while scanning for the missing patrol. The Black Hawk's defensive systems detected multiple threats, but the aircraft's armor and maneuverability kept them ahead of the enemy fire. Overwatch, Raven 6. I need immediate close air support. Enemy positions are well prepared and coordinated. Negative, Raven 6. No close air support available. RTB immediately. The order struck her like a physical blow. No close air support meant no cavalry coming to help, no fighter jets to suppress enemy positions. In her 5 years of combat operations, she'd never been denied fire support when taking enemy contact. Unless someone wanted her to take fire. Banking hard around a rocky outcrop, Nix spotted something that made her blood freeze. Delta 7's vehicles sat in a neat row beside a dried riverbed, their doors open and contents scattered. But there were no bodies, no signs of a firefight, no indication that the patrol had been ambushed while mounted. Instead, the scene looked staged, arranged to appear like the aftermath of combat. Overwatch, I have eyes on Delta 7's vehicles. No personnel visible, but scene appears unusual. The radio crackled with interference before a new voice responded. Raven 6, you are ordered to return to base. Do not investigate ground positions. That voice belonged to Colonel Hayes, the base commander. The fact that he was personally monitoring her mission confirmed her worst suspicions. This was not a rescue operation. It was something else entirely, something that required the highest levels of command authority. Enemy fire intensified as she circled the abandoned vehicles. Rocket-propelled grenades streaked past the Black Hawk's rotors, their warheads exploding against the valley walls in brilliant flashes. The enemy had prepared this kill zone with professional precision, creating overlapping fields of fire that would destroy any aircraft foolish enough to linger. But Nix had not survived 5 years of combat by following orders that made no tactical sense. Delta 7 was somewhere in this valley, and she would find them. The truth revealed itself in fragments, each piece more disturbing than the last. As Nix maneuvered the Black Hawk through the enemy fire, her thermal imaging system detected heat signatures moving through the rocks below. Not the chaotic movement of panicked soldiers, but the deliberate positioning of trained professionals. She counted at least 30 enemy combatants, far more than intelligence had suggested. Their weapons were too advanced, their tactics too coordinated for a typical insurgent group. These were professional soldiers, possibly foreign advisors, and they had prepared this ambush with intimate knowledge of American tactics and equipment. Overwatch, Raven 6. I count 3-0 plus enemy personnel in prepared positions. This is not a random encounter. Someone fed them our operational plans. The radio silence stretched unnaturally long. When the response came, it carried barely controlled anger. Raven 6, you are ordered to cease reconnaissance and return to base. Acknowledge. Instead of acknowledging, Nyx pressed deeper into the valley. The enemy fire had lessened, not because of her evasive maneuvers, but because someone had given the order to capture, not destroy. The realization hit her like ice water. They wanted her alive. Banking around another ridge, she spotted movement in a cave complex that had been marked as uninhabited. Through her night vision, she could see figures moving deliberately through the entrance, carrying equipment that looked suspiciously like American military gear. As she watched, 6 figures emerged from the cave, hands bound behind their backs, prodded forward by armed guards. Delta 7, they were alive but they were prisoners. The sight of her captured colleagues triggered a surge of protective fury. These were her people, soldiers who had trusted their intelligence and their chain of command. Now they were being used as bait in a trap that someone in her own command structure had helped set. Overwatch, I have visual on Delta 7 personnel. They are alive but in enemy custody. Raven 6, break off immediately. That is a direct order. The desperation in the voice confirmed what she already knew. This was not about rescuing a missing patrol. It was about eliminating a pilot who had seen too much, who had asked too many questions, who had stumbled onto an operation that was never supposed to be exposed. Enemy fire resumed with renewed intensity as she circled the cave complex. But now she understood the pattern. They were hurting her, forcing her toward a specific landing zone where heavier weapons waited. The entire valley was a carefully prepared kill zone, designed to eliminate both the rescued and the rescuer. The Black Hawk shuddered as enemy rounds found their mark. Warning lights flickered on her instrument panel as hydraulic fluid sprayed from damaged lines. The aircraft was dying around her, but she had found what she came for. Now she had to decide whether to die with her secrets or live to expose them. The decision crystallized in the space between heartbeats. As enemy fire intensified around the failing Black Hawk, Nyx realized that returning to base meant flying into a different kind of trap. Someone in the command structure had orchestrated this entire operation, using Delta 7 as bait to eliminate a pilot who had learned too much about their activities. The helicopter's engines began to stutter, damaged by enemy fire and low on fuel. Warning alarms filled the cockpit as multiple systems failed simultaneously. She had perhaps 5 minutes of flight time remaining, not enough to reach friendly territory even if she abandoned the captured patrol. Raven 6, respond immediately. You are ordered to return to base. The radio transmission carried an edge of panic now. Whoever was running this operation had expected her to die quietly in the valley, another casualty of the ongoing conflict. Her survival complicated their plans, threatened to expose whatever they were hiding. Banking the damaged aircraft toward the cave complex, Nyx made a decision that would define the rest of her life. Instead of retreating, she would attack. Instead of following orders that led to death, she would create her own path to survival. The Black Hawk's weapon systems were still functional despite the damage. She armed the aircraft's 30 chain gun and door-mounted machine guns, preparing to engage the enemy positions around the cave. If she was going to die, she would die fighting for her people. This is Raven 6. I am engaging enemy positions to extract captured personnel. If anyone is listening who still believes in the mission, I need immediate support. The radio exploded with contradictory orders, threats, and demands for her to abort. But buried in the chaos, she heard a single transmission that gave her hope. Staff Sergeant Chen, the Operations Center Communications Specialist, sent a coded message that only she would understand. Raven 6, be advised, package is compromised. Recommend alternate extraction. Chen was telling her that the entire operation had been corrupted, that her own command structure could not be trusted. But he was also telling her that not everyone was part of the conspiracy, that some people were still fighting for the right side. The Black Hawk's chain gun roared to life, sending streams of 30 rounds into the enemy positions surrounding the cave. Explosions bloomed across the ridgelines as her fire found ammunition supplies and equipment. The enemy response was immediate and overwhelming, but she had achieved surprise in the one moment when it mattered most. Through the chaos of battle, she saw Delta 7's captors forcing the prisoners deeper into the cave complex. Soon, they would be beyond reach, lost in tunnels that had been carved by generations of fighters. If she was going to save them, it had to be now. The Black Hawk shuddered as a rocket-propelled grenade exploded nearby. The aircraft was dying, its systems failing one by one. But she had accomplished something important. She had disrupted the enemy's plans, forced them to abandon their carefully prepared positions. In the growing light of dawn, she began to see the true scope of the operation arrayed against her. This was not a simple ambush. It was a complex deception involving multiple levels of command, foreign operatives, and American personnel who had chosen profit over patriotism. The Black Hawk's engines finally gave out as she attempted to land near the cave entrance. The aircraft hit the rocky ground hard, its rotors shattering against the canyon walls. But she was alive, armed, and surrounded by enemies who had never expected to face a pilot on the ground. As she crawled from the wreckage, Nyx Thorne began the most dangerous mission of her career. The wreckage of the Black Hawk burned behind her as Nyx moved through the pre-dawn darkness toward the cave complex. Her survival gear included an M4 carbine, 6 magazines of ammunition, basic medical supplies, and a radio that she dared not use. Every transmission would reveal her position to people who wanted her dead. The enemy had not expected her to survive the crash, and their response was chaotic and disorganized. She could hear shouted orders in multiple languages: Arabic, Dari, and surprisingly, English with an American accent. The presence of American voices among the enemy confirmed her worst suspicions about the nature of this operation. Moving through the rocks with skills learned in 5 years of combat, she approached the cave entrance where she had seen Delta 7 disappear. The facility was larger than it appeared from the air, with multiple entrances and what appeared to be a sophisticated tunnel system. This was not a random insurgent hideout. It was a permanent installation, possibly years in the making. Her thermal scope revealed at least 12 guards around the immediate area, armed with modern weapons and equipped with night vision devices. These were professionals, not the typical insurgent fighters she had faced in previous engagements. Their equipment, tactics, and coordination suggested military training and foreign support. "Control, this is Raven 6. I am on the ground and mobile, attempting to reach captured personnel." The response came immediately, but not from the voice she expected. "Raven 6, this is Colonel Hayes. You are ordered to surrender to friendly forces immediately. Your position is compromised." The order struck her as both revealing and insulting. Hayes was telling her to surrender to the same forces that had captured Delta 7, essentially ordering her to become a prisoner of the people who had tried to kill her. The colonel's involvement in this operation was now undeniable. "Negative control. I am proceeding with extraction mission." "Raven 6, you are disobeying direct orders. Cease all operations immediately." She switched off the radio and continued moving toward the cave. Whatever was happening here involved people at the highest levels of command, and she could trust no one except herself. The captured patrol was her responsibility, and she would not abandon them to save her own career. The first guard died silently, his throat cut before he could raise an alarm. The second guard was dispatched with equal efficiency, his body dragged behind a rock formation where it would not be discovered until daylight. Nix moved through the enemy positions like a ghost, using skills that had been honed in conflicts that officially did not exist. The cave entrance was heavily guarded, but she found an alternate route through a narrow fissure that connected to the main tunnel system. The passage was barely wide enough for her body, and the darkness was absolute, but it led her past the outer defenses and into the heart of the enemy facility. The tunnels were more extensive than she had imagined, carved from the living rock and reinforced with modern materials. Electric lighting illuminated the passages, and she could hear the hum of generators providing power. This was not a temporary hideout, it was a permanent base of operations. As she moved deeper into the complex, she began to understand the true scope of what she had stumbled into. This was not about capturing an American patrol. It was about something much larger, something that required the participation of people within her own command structure. The cave system was a logistics hub, a place where weapons, money, and intelligence changed hands away from official oversight. The sound of American voices grew louder as she approached what appeared to be a command center. Through a crack in the rock wall, she could see into a chamber where maps and communication equipment covered every surface. Three men in American military uniforms stood around a table, discussing something with evident urgency. The pilot was supposed to be eliminated with the aircraft, one of them was saying. Her survival complicates the entire operation. She's one person with limited ammunition, another replied. We can handle her. The third man's voice carried the authority of command. You underestimate Captain Thorne. She's been asking questions about our operations for months. If she reaches friendly forces with what she's learned, we're all compromised. Nix felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cave's temperature. They knew her name, knew her suspicions, and had been monitoring her activities for months. This operation was not about Delta 7. It was about eliminating a pilot who had learned too much about their illegal activities. The sound of footsteps echoed through the tunnels as guards began searching for her. She had perhaps minutes before they discovered her location, but she had learned something that changed everything. This was not an enemy facility. It was an American facility, operated by people who had betrayed their oath and their country. The captured patrol was being held deeper in the complex, but reaching them would require passing through the command center where three traitors plotted her death. She checked her ammunition and prepared for the fight of her life. The battle for the cave complex began with a single, perfectly placed shot. Nix's M4 carbine coughed once, and the guard at the end of the tunnel dropped without a sound. The suppressor she had improvised from salvaged materials would buy her a few precious seconds of surprise, but no more. Moving through the limestone passages with surgical precision, she eliminated two more guards before the alarm was raised. The cave system erupted into chaos as armed men scrambled to locate the intruder, their voices echoing off the ancient walls. But chaos was her ally now. In the confusion, she could move more freely than in the organized calm of a prepared defense. The command center lay ahead, its entrance guarded by four men with automatic weapons. Through her scope, she could see the three American officers inside, bent over communication equipment as they coordinated the search. One of them was speaking rapidly into a radio, his voice carrying the distinctive accent of someone from the American South. All units, we have a hostile in the tunnel system, armed and extremely dangerous. Shoot to kill. The order confirmed what she already knew. This was not about capturing a rogue pilot. It was about eliminating a witness. These men had crossed lines that could never be uncrossed, and her survival threatened to expose their crimes to the world. She waited in the shadows as the search teams passed her position, their boots clicking against the stone floor. When the last man had moved beyond her hiding place, she emerged from the darkness and began her approach to the command center. The guards were focused outward, watching for threats from the main tunnels, not expecting an attack from behind. The first guard fell to her knife, his body lowered silently to the ground. The second guard turned at the sound of movement, but her rifle was already trained on his chest. The suppressed shot echoed once through the chamber, and he crumpled against the wall. The two remaining guards spun toward the sound, their weapons rising. But Nix was already moving, diving behind a communication console as automatic fire erupted around her. Bullets sparked off the electronic equipment, sending showers of sparks through the darkness. "She's in the command center," one of the American officers shouted. "Lock it down." The sound of running feet echoed through the tunnels as reinforcements rushed toward the battle. Nix had perhaps 2 minutes before the chamber was flooded with enemy fighters. But 2 minutes was enough to accomplish what she had come for. Rising from behind the console, she engaged the remaining guards with clinical efficiency. Her rifle fire was precise and deadly, each shot finding its mark despite the chaos of battle. The guards fell one by one, their bodies scattered across the stone floor. The three American officers pressed themselves against the far wall, their eyes wide with terror. They had ordered her death, but they had never expected to face her themselves. In their arrogance, they had assumed that one pilot could never threaten their carefully constructed operation. "Gentlemen," Nix said, her rifle trained on the senior officer, "I think we need to talk." The officer's nameplate read Peterson, and his insignia indicated the rank of lieutenant colonel. His face was pale but defiant, the expression of a man who had committed crimes but believed he was justified in doing so. "Captain Thorne," he said, his voice steadier than she had expected, "you're interfering with a classified operation. Stand down immediately." "Classified by whom?" she replied, not lowering her weapon. "Because I'm beginning to think this operation exists outside any official chain of command." The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. Soon the chamber would be flooded with enemy fighters, and her temporary advantage would disappear. But she had to know the truth about what she had stumbled into. "Where is Delta 7?" she demanded. Peterson's smile was cold and calculating. "Safe, for now, but their continued safety depends on your cooperation." The threat was clear: surrender or watch her captured colleagues die. But Nix had learned long ago that cooperating with criminals rarely led to mercy. If she surrendered, both she and Delta 7 would disappear into the darkness of an operation that officially did not exist. "I want to see them," she said. "That can be arranged." The chamber erupted into violence as the first wave of reinforcements arrived. Nix dove behind the communication equipment as automatic fire filled the air, her mind racing through the tactical situation. She was outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in an underground facility with no possibility of escape. But she had something her enemies did not: the desperate courage of someone fighting for the right reasons. The firefight in the command center lasted exactly 97 seconds and cost the lives of 8 men. When the smoke cleared, Nix stood alone among the bodies, her rifle trained on Lieutenant Colonel Peterson's chest. The other 2 American officers lay motionless against the wall, victims of their own men's indiscriminate fire. Peterson raised his hand slowly, his face a mask of controlled fear. "You're making a mistake, Captain. You don't understand what you're interfering with." "Then explain it to me," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Tell me why American officers are running guns to insurgents. Tell me why you tried to have me killed." The lieutenant colonel's laugh was bitter and hollow. "Guns. You think this is about weapons smuggling. Captain, you have no idea what you've stumbled into." Behind her, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the tunnels. The remaining guards were regrouping, preparing for another assault. She had perhaps minutes before they overwhelmed her position, but she needed answers more than she needed ammunition. "Talk," she ordered. Peterson's eyes darted toward the tunnel entrance, calculating his chances of survival. "This facility is an off-books intelligence operation. We're gathering information on high-value targets throughout the region. The weapons, the money, the local contacts. It's all part of a larger counterterrorism strategy. And Delta 7. Wrong place, wrong time. Their patrol stumbled onto one of our operations. We had to contain them until the mission was complete. The explanation was smooth, professional, and completely false. Nix had seen enough intelligence operations to recognize the difference between legitimate activity and criminal enterprise. The equipment in this facility, the foreign operatives, the carefully planned ambush, none of it suggested official sanction. "You're lying," she said simply. Peterson's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the desperation beneath. "Even if I am, it doesn't matter. You'll never leave this facility alive. Too many people have invested too much in this operation." The approaching footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the sound of metal on stone. The guards were dragging heavy weapons through the tunnels, preparing for a siege. Soon they would pour into the command center with overwhelming firepower, and her defensive position would become a tomb. "Where is Delta 7? She demanded again. "Deeper in the complex, but they're guarded by professionals, not the local talent you've been fighting. You'll never reach them." The sound of automatic weapons fire erupted from the tunnel as the guards tested her defenses. Bullets sparked off the stone walls, sending fragments of rock through the air. They were probing for weaknesses, preparing for a final assault. Nix grabbed Peterson by the collar and pressed her rifle against his throat. "You're going to take me to them." "I'm not going anywhere with you." "Then you're going to die right here." The lieutenant colonel's eyes widened as he realized she was serious. Whatever moral constraints had once guided her actions had been burned away by betrayal and combat. She was no longer the pilot who had taken off from base 6 hours ago. She was something harder, more dangerous. "The holding area is through the main tunnel past the armory," he said finally. "But there are 20 guards between here and there. You'll never make it." "We'll see." The final assault began as she dragged Peterson toward the tunnel entrance. Enemy fire erupted from 3 directions, filling the command center with deadly metal. But she had chosen her hostage well. The guards could not risk killing their commanding officer. "Hold fire," Peterson shouted. "Hold your fire." The shooting stopped, but the guards remained in position, their weapons trained on the tunnel entrance. Nix emerged from the command center with her rifle pressed against the lieutenant colonel's neck, using his body as a shield against the dozen men who wanted her dead. "Anyone shoots and your colonel dies," she announced, her voice echoing through the stone passages. The standoff stretched through several heartbeats as the guards processed the situation. These were professionals, trained to handle hostage situations, but they had never expected to face an American pilot in their own facility. Their hesitation would cost them dearly. "Move," she ordered Peterson, and they began the deadly journey toward the holding area where Delta 7 waited. The march through the tunnel system became a deadly ballet of threat and counter-threat. Nix kept Peterson's body between herself and the guards, but she knew that professional soldiers would eventually find an angle, a moment of opportunity when they could take the shot. Her survival depended on reaching the holding area before their patience ran out. The tunnels were carved from living rock, their walls polished smooth by centuries of water flow. Electric cables snaked along the ceiling, powering the lights that turned the ancient passages into a modern military facility. The engineering was impressive, the kind of long-term construction that suggested significant investment and official backing. "How long has this operation been running?" she asked Peterson as they moved deeper into the complex. "Long enough," he replied, his voice tight with fear and anger. "Long enough to become too important to shut down." The guards followed at a distance, their weapons ready but unusable. She could hear them communicating through hand signals and subtle movements, coordinating for the moment when they would strike. Professional soldiers, but not professional enough to realize that she was also a professional. "The armory is ahead," Peterson said, indicating a heavy door set into the tunnel wall. "The holding area is beyond that." Through the door's reinforced glass, Nix could see weapons and equipment that had no business being in an unofficial facility. Military-grade explosives, advanced communication systems, and enough small arms to equip a battalion. This was not an intelligence operation. It was a private army. "Who's funding this?" she demanded. "People who understand that sometimes the mission requires actions that can't be officially sanctioned." The euphemism was telling. In her experience, unsanctioned actions usually meant illegal activities conducted by people who believed they were above the law. The weapons cache they were passing represented millions of dollars in equipment, far more than any covert operation would require. The holding area lay ahead, its entrance guarded by 6 men with automatic weapons. These were not the local fighters she had been battling. They were Americans, their gear and bearing marking them as special operations veterans. Their eyes were cold and professional as they watched her approach with their commanding officer. "Stand down," Peterson ordered. "Let us pass." The guards exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. They had been trained to follow orders, but they had also been trained to recognize when orders came from a compromised source. Their hesitation lasted exactly 3 seconds too long. "I said stand down," Peterson shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. The guards moved aside, but their weapons remained ready. Nix could see the calculations in their eyes, the professional assessment of angles and opportunities. They would strike the moment she passed through the door, when her attention was focused on the prisoners beyond. The holding area was a natural cavern that had been reinforced with concrete and steel. Harsh fluorescent lights illuminated 6 figures seated against the far wall, their hands bound behind their backs. Delta 7 was alive, but they showed signs of interrogation and abuse. Sergeant Martinez looked up as she entered, his eyes widening with recognition and hope. "Captain Thorne." "I'm here, Sergeant. We're going home." The promise felt hollow even as she spoke it. Home was a concept that had lost meaning in the last 6 hours. The people who had sent her on this mission had betrayed her, the chain of command had been compromised, and the country she had sworn to defend was being sold to the highest bidder. But Delta 7 was depending on her, and that was enough. "Release them," she ordered Peterson. "I can't do that." "Then you'll die with them." The standoff stretched through several heartbeats as both sides calculated their options. But Nix had already decided that she would not leave without her people, regardless of the cost. "Keys," she demanded, pressing the rifle harder against Peterson's throat. The lieutenant colonel's hand moved slowly toward his pocket, but his eyes were focused on something behind her. She realized too late that the guards had been using hand signals, coordinating their attack while she was distracted by the prisoners. The first shot came from her left, aimed at her shoulder to disable rather than kill. But Nix had been anticipating treachery, and she moved with the fluid grace of someone who had survived too many ambushes to be caught off guard. The bullet sparked off the stone wall where her head had been a moment before. Peterson tried to break free as the shooting began, but her grip was iron. She spun him around, using his body to absorb the second shot, then put a bullet through the closest guard's chest. The man dropped like a stone, his weapon clattering across the concrete floor. "Cease fire," Peterson screamed, but his authority had evaporated along with his men's confidence. They had expected an easy target, not a pilot who fought like a special operations veteran. Nix put 2 more rounds into the remaining guards, her shots precise despite the chaos of battle. The cavern filled with smoke and the metallic smell of blood as bodies fell around the entrance. But she was not unscathed. A bullet had grazed her left arm, and warm blood seeped through her sleeve. Martinez, she called out, her voice cutting through the ringing in her ears. Can you move? Yes, ma'am, the sergeant replied, struggling against his bonds. We're all mobile. She found the keys in Peterson's pocket and tossed them to Martinez, keeping her rifle trained on the tunnel entrance. More guards would be coming, drawn by the sound of gunfire. They had perhaps minutes before the cavern became a killing ground. Get everyone loose, she ordered. We're leaving. As Delta 7 freed themselves, Nick studied the tactical situation. The tunnel system had multiple exits, but all of them were controlled by enemy forces. The ventilation shafts were too small for human passage, and the main entrance was heavily fortified. They were trapped in a stone prison with no apparent means of escape. Captain, Martinez said, now free of his bonds, there's something you need to know about this place. Talk while we move. This isn't just a weapons cache. They're running a full-scale intelligence operation here. We saw communications equipment, financial records, contacts with foreign operatives. This goes way beyond anything we've encountered before. The implications hit her like a physical blow. If Martinez was correct, then this facility was not just a criminal enterprise. It was a threat to national security. The weapons, the money, the foreign contacts, it all pointed to an operation that was selling American secrets to the highest bidder. Did you see who was running it? She asked. American officers, but working with people we didn't recognize. Foreign accents, military bearing, professional intelligence operatives. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the tunnels. The enemy was regrouping, preparing for another assault. But this time, they would not be taking prisoners. Nix and Delta 7 had seen too much to be allowed to live. There's another way out, Peterson said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. But you'll never make it. Try me. The lieutenant colonel's smile was cold and knowing. The old mine shaft. It connects to the surface, but it's been sealed for decades. The passage is flooded, unstable, and probably radioactive. You'd be trading a quick death for a slow one. Martinez moved to her side, his face grim but determined. Captain, we've been in that shaft. It's dangerous, but it's not impassable. If we can reach the surface, we can call for extraction. What makes you think extraction is possible? She asked. The people who sent me here want me dead. The chain of command is compromised. We're on our own. Not everyone, Martinez replied. Staff Sergeant Chen tried to warn you. There are still people fighting for the right side. The name gave her hope. Chen was solid, a 10-year veteran who had never shown anything but loyalty to the mission and the people under his command. If he was still in the fight, then perhaps there was still a chance to expose the truth. Show me this mine shaft, she said. Peterson's directions led them through a maze of passages toward the oldest part of the facility. The tunnels here were rougher, carved by hand rather than machine, and the air carried the smell of ancient stone and something else, something that made her skin crawl. Uranium, Martinez explained, seeing her expression. The original mine was for uranium extraction. That's why they sealed it. The implications were staggering. If this facility was built on top of an abandoned uranium mine, then the contamination would make it uninhabitable for decades. But it also meant that the people running this operation were willing to risk their own lives for whatever they were hiding. The mine shaft entrance was blocked by a heavy steel door, its surface covered with warning signs in multiple languages. But the locks were old and corroded, and Martinez was able to force them open with improvised tools. Beyond the door lay a passage that descended into absolute darkness. The air was thick and humid, carrying the sound of dripping water and something else, the subtle hiss of radioactive decay. It was a journey into hell, but it was also their only path to freedom. This is insane, one of Delta 7's soldiers muttered. Insane is staying here, Nix replied. Move out. They descended into the abandoned mine with Peterson as their reluctant guide. The passage was narrow and treacherous, carved from living rock by miners who had died decades ago. Water dripped from the ceiling, and strange fungi grew in the corners where light never reached. The radiation levels were detectable but not immediately lethal. They could survive the exposure if they moved quickly, but prolonged contact would mean slow death from cancer and organ failure. It was a price they would pay for freedom, assuming they lived long enough to develop tumors. How far to the surface? Nix asked Peterson. 2 miles, maybe 3. The shaft connects to the old processing facility on the ridge. Behind them, the sound of pursuit echoed through the tunnels. The enemy had discovered their escape route and was following, but they would be slowed by the same hazards that threatened Delta 7. The radiation, the unstable passages, the risk of cave-ins, all of it worked in favor of the fleeing Americans. The mine shaft branched repeatedly, creating a maze of passages that led in all directions. Some connected to the surface, others to deeper levels where the uranium ore had been extracted. Without Peterson's guidance, they would have been lost within minutes. "Why are you helping us?" Nix asked the lieutenant colonel. "Because I want to live," he replied simply, "and because I'm beginning to realize that I've been working for the wrong people." The confession was unexpected but not surprising. In her experience, criminals rarely maintained their loyalty when faced with personal extinction. Peterson had betrayed his country for money and power, but he would betray his partners for survival. "Tell me about the operation," she said as they climbed through a particularly narrow passage. "It started as legitimate intelligence gathering. We were monitoring insurgent activities, tracking weapons shipments, building networks of local contacts. But somewhere along the way, it became something else." "What kind of something else?" "A marketplace. Information, weapons, people, everything was for sale to the highest bidder. The foreign operatives weren't just sources, they were customers. We were selling American secrets to anyone willing to pay." The truth was exactly what she had suspected, but hearing it confirmed made her stomach turn. American soldiers, sworn to defend their country, had become merchants of treason. The weapons cache, the foreign contacts, the elaborate security, it all made sense now. "How high does this go?" she asked. "Higher than you want to know," Peterson replied. "This operation has protection at levels that would surprise you." The passage ahead opened into a larger chamber, its ceiling lost in shadows. Ancient mining equipment sat rusted and abandoned, covered by decades of dust and decay. But there was something else in the chamber, the sound of running water and the faint glow of daylight from above. "The processing facility," Peterson said, pointing toward a shaft that led upward. "The surface is maybe 300 feet above us." Martinez examined the shaft with a professional eye. "It's climbable, but it'll take time, and if they're following us, we'll be sitting ducks." "Then we better move fast." The climb began in darkness and ended in light. 300 feet of rusted ladder rungs, corroded cables, and crumbling stone. But at the top lay freedom, the abandoned processing facility where trucks had once carried uranium ore to markets around the world. As they reached the surface, Nix felt sunlight on her face for the first time in what seemed like days. The Afghanistan landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, beautiful and hostile under the morning sky. But they were free, and they were alive. "Now what?" Martinez asked. "Now we expose the truth," she replied, checking her radio equipment. "Chen, this is Raven 6. Do you copy?" The response came immediately, filled with relief and urgency. "Raven 6, this is Chen. Thank God you're alive. The situation here has deteriorated rapidly. Colonel Hayes has been relieved of command, and there's an investigation team inbound from Washington." "Copy that. We have evidence of a major intelligence compromise. American personnel involved in selling classified information to foreign operatives." "Understood. Can you reach extraction point Alpha?" Nix checked her map. calculating distances and threat levels. Extraction Point Alpha was 12 miles away, across terrain that was probably crawling with enemy forces. But it was also their best chance of reaching friendly territory with the evidence they had gathered. "We'll be there in 6 hours," she said. "Roger, help is coming, Captain. Hold on." The march across the Afghanistan landscape became a race against time and enemy forces. Nix led Delta 7 through valleys and over ridges, using terrain features to mask their movement from aerial surveillance. Peterson remained with them, partly as a guide and partly as insurance against the forces still hunting them. The evidence they carried was explosive: names, dates, financial records, and communication logs that documented years of treasonous activity. But evidence was useless if they died before reaching friendly forces, and the enemy was closing in from multiple directions. "Aircraft," Martinez warned, pointing toward the eastern horizon. A helicopter appeared against the morning sky, its rotors beating steadily as it followed their probable route. But something was wrong with its approach. The aircraft was flying too low, too aggressively, for a routine patrol. "That's not one of ours," Nix said, studying the aircraft through her binoculars. "Russian design but modified. Whoever's flying it knows what they're doing." The helicopter began a search pattern, methodically covering the ground where they had been walking. If it continued on its current heading, it would spot them within minutes. They needed cover, and they needed it immediately. "There," Peterson pointed toward a cluster of rocks about 200 meters away. "That depression will hide us from aerial observation." They ran for the rocks as the helicopter approached, its rotors creating a dust storm that obscured the landscape. But the pilot was experienced, using the terrain to mask his own approach while maintaining observation of potential hiding places. The aircraft passed directly overhead, its cameras scanning the ground below. Nix pressed herself against the stone, hoping that their desert camouflage would blend with the rocky terrain. The helicopter continued its search pattern, but something about its behavior suggested that the pilot knew exactly where they were. "He's not searching," she whispered to Martinez. "He's hurting us." The sergeant nodded grimly. "Toward what?" The answer came from the western ridge, where muzzle flashes began to sparkle in the morning sunlight. Enemy forces had positioned themselves along their route to the extraction point, creating a kill zone that would eliminate them long before they reached safety. "We're surrounded," Peterson said, his voice barely controlled. "They've been tracking us since we left the facility." "How?" Nix demanded. The lieutenant colonel's smile was bitter and knowing. "Because I've been transmitting our position since we reached the surface. They're not just hunting you, Captain, they're hunting me too. I know too much about their operation to be allowed to live." The betrayal was complete and absolute. Even the man who had helped create this conspiracy was now marked for death by his former partners. There was no honor among thieves, and no mercy for those who had outlived their usefulness. "You bastard," Martinez snarled, raising his weapon. "Wait," Nix said, her mind racing through the tactical situation. "If they're tracking him, then they know exactly where we are, but they also know where he is." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that Lieutenant Colonel Peterson is about to become our unwitting ally." The plan was simple, desperate, and probably suicidal, but it was also their only chance of survival. If the enemy was tracking Peterson's transmissions, then they could use those transmissions to feed false information about their location and intentions. "You're going to call your friends," Nix told Peterson, "and you're going to tell them exactly what I want them to hear. They'll kill me if I betray them." "They'll kill you anyway, but if you help us, you might live long enough to testify against them." Peterson's hand moved slowly toward his radio, his face pale with terror and resignation. Whatever choices had brought him to this moment, he was finally beginning to understand their consequences. "This is Peterson," he transmitted. I have the Americans trapped in grid square 418942. They're injured and low on ammunition. Request immediate extraction. The response came immediately, filled with relief and urgency. Copy Peterson. Extraction team is inbound. Maintain position and mark your location. Nix smiled grimly. The enemy was about to walk into a trap of their own making, drawn by the promise of an easy victory. But she had learned long ago that in warfare, the side that believed victory was assured was often the side that lost everything. Move out, she ordered Delta 7. We have work to do. The battle for Extraction Point Alpha began 30 minutes before the scheduled rendezvous. Nix had positioned her people in a defensive perimeter around the landing zone, using the natural terrain to create overlapping fields of fire. The enemy approached with confidence, expecting to find wounded Americans waiting for rescue. Instead, they found a carefully prepared ambush. The first enemy helicopter exploded in a ball of fire as Martinez's improvised rocket found its fuel tank. The aircraft spun out of control, its rotors disintegrating as it hit the ground. But two more helicopters remained, circling the landing zone like predators. Raven 6, this is Rescue 1. We are inbound to your position. Mark your location with smoke. The transmission came from a different voice, one that she recognized from countless previous missions. Chief Warrant Officer Jackson was the best pilot in the squadron, and his presence meant that someone had finally decided to send real help. Rescue 1, this is Raven 6. The landing zone is hot. Multiple enemy aircraft in the area. Approach with caution. Copy that. We see the smoke, coming in fast and low. The US-60 Black Hawk appeared on the horizon, flying at maximum speed toward the landing zone. But the enemy helicopters were moving to intercept, their weapons systems locked onto the approaching rescue aircraft. Rescue 1, break left. Enemy aircraft on your 6. Jackson's helicopter banked hard as rocket-propelled grenades streaked past its rotors. The pilot was skilled, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. The rescue mission would fail unless someone evened the odds. Nix grabbed the radio from Peterson's equipment and switched to the enemy frequency. All units, this is Peterson. American rescue helicopter is approaching from the south. Concentrate fire on that target. The deception worked perfectly. The enemy aircraft turned away from Jackson's helicopter and began searching for the non-existent threat from the south. In that moment of confusion, the rescue helicopter reached the landing zone. Go, 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 Nix shouted, and Delta 7 sprinted toward the aircraft. The enemy pilots realized their mistake within seconds, but it was too late. The Americans were already boarding the helicopter, and Jackson was pulling power for immediate departure. The rescue aircraft lifted off just as enemy fire began to converge on its position. Raven 6, this is Rescue 1. All personnel aboard, departing the area. But the enemy was not finished. The remaining helicopters pursued the rescue aircraft, their weapons blazing as they tried to prevent the Americans from reaching safety. The chase became a running battle across the Afghanistan landscape, with Jackson using every trick he had learned in 5 years of combat flying. Rescue 1, you have 2 aircraft on your tail, distance closing rapidly. Roger that, hold on back there. The helicopter dove toward the ground, using the terrain to mask its approach from enemy weapons. But the pursuing aircraft were closing fast, and their pilots were skilled enough to maintain contact despite Jackson's evasive maneuvers. That's when the unexpected happened. A pair of F-16 Fighting Falcons appeared from the north, their afterburners blazing as they streaked toward the battle. The fighter jets had been scrambled from a base in Pakistan, responding to emergency calls that had finally reached people who were not part of the conspiracy. Rescue 1, this is Viper Flight. We have you in sight. Defensive formation immediate. The enemy helicopters broke off their pursuit as the fighter jets approached, recognizing that they were now outmatched. But one pilot, either braver or more foolish than the others, continued his attack run on the rescue helicopter. The F-16's 20 cannon spoke once, a brief burst that turned the enemy aircraft into falling debris. The remaining helicopter fled toward the mountains, its pilot unwilling to face the American fighter jets. Rescue 1, this is Viper flight. Area secure, proceed to base. Jackson's voice carried a mixture of relief and professional satisfaction. Copy, Viper flight. Thanks for the assist. As the rescue helicopter carried them toward safety, Nix looked back at the battlefield they were leaving behind. The abandoned uranium mine, the secret facility, the evidence of treason, it all lay behind them now, waiting for the investigation teams that would soon arrive. Peterson sat in the corner of the aircraft, his hands cuffed and his face pale with the knowledge of what awaited him. He had betrayed his country, his oath, and his fellow soldiers. But he had also provided the information that would expose the conspiracy and bring justice to those who had died for their crimes. "It's over," Martinez said, his voice barely audible over the helicopter's engines. "No," Nix replied, watching the landscape pass below. "It's just beginning." The debriefing lasted 18 hours and involved representatives from every major intelligence agency in the United States government. Nix sat in a windowless room in a facility that officially did not exist, answering questions that would determine the fate of people she had never met. The evidence they had brought back was more damaging than anyone had expected. Financial records showed millions of dollars in transactions with foreign operatives. Communication logs detailed the sale of classified information, and witness testimony painted a picture of systematic treason that reached into the highest levels of military command. "Captain Thorne," the lead investigator said, "your actions have exposed a conspiracy that threatened national security, but we need to understand exactly what happened in that facility." She told them everything: the ambush, the betrayal, the underground complex, the evidence of foreign involvement. But she also told them about the American voices she had heard, the uniforms she had seen, the systematic nature of the operation. "How many people were involved?" another investigator asked. "More than we've identified," she replied. "This wasn't a rogue operation. It was a systematic criminal enterprise with protection at multiple levels." Peterson's testimony confirmed her worst fears. The conspiracy involved active-duty military personnel, intelligence operatives, and civilian contractors. They had been selling American secrets for years, using their official positions to access classified information and their unofficial networks to find buyers. "The uranium mine was perfect cover," Peterson explained during his interrogation. "No one would look for an intelligence facility in a contaminated area, and the local population avoided the region because of the radiation." "Who was funding the operation?" the investigator demanded. "Multiple sources: foreign intelligence services, criminal organizations, private military contractors, anyone willing to pay for American secrets." The investigation expanded rapidly as more evidence emerged. Bank accounts in offshore havens, communication networks that spanned multiple continents, and a web of corruption that had infected American military operations throughout the region. But the most damaging revelation was yet to come. The conspiracy had not just been selling information. It had been actively undermining American military operations, providing enemy forces with detailed intelligence about troop movements, supply routes, and tactical plans. "How many soldiers died because of this?" Nix asked during one of her sessions. "We may never know," the investigator replied. "But our preliminary analysis suggests that dozens of attacks were facilitated by information from this network." The number felt like a physical blow. Dozens of soldiers, men and women who had trusted their chain of command, had died because people sworn to protect them had sold their lives for money. The betrayal was complete and absolute. "What happens now?" she asked. Now we clean house, the investigator said. Every person involved in this conspiracy will be identified, arrested, and prosecuted. The facility will be destroyed, the financial networks will be dismantled, and the foreign operatives will be expelled. And the people who died, their families will never know the truth. Officially, they died in combat operations against insurgent forces. The classified nature of this investigation means that the real story will remain buried. The injustice of it was staggering. Soldiers had died because of treason, but their families would never know that their sacrifice had been betrayed by the very people sworn to protect them. The truth would remain classified, hidden in files that would never see daylight. There's something else, the investigator continued. Your actions have made you a target. The surviving members of this conspiracy will want revenge, and they have resources that extend far beyond Afghanistan. What are you saying? I'm saying that your life is in danger. We can provide protection, but it will mean leaving your unit, your career, everything you've built. The choice was stark and unforgiving. She could accept protection and disappear into the witness protection program, or she could return to active duty and face the consequences of her actions. Either way, the life she had known was over. I need time to think, she said. You have 24 hours. After that, we'll need your decision. As she left the debriefing room, Nix felt the weight of everything that had happened. She had saved Delta 7 and exposed a conspiracy that threatened national security. But she had also destroyed her career, made enemies who would never stop hunting her, and learned truths that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The corridor outside the debriefing room was empty except for one figure waiting by the elevator. Staff Sergeant Chen stood at attention, his uniform crisp and his expression serious. "Captain," he said, snapping a perfect salute. "Chen," she replied, returning the salute, "I hear you tried to warn me." I suspected something was wrong with the mission parameters. When Colonel Hayes started asking questions about your location, I knew the situation was compromised. Thank you. Your warning probably saved my life. Just doing my job, ma'am. But I wanted you to know that not everyone was part of the conspiracy. There are still people fighting for the right side. The comment gave her hope, but it also raised questions. How many people knew? More than should have, but fewer than you might think. The conspiracy was compartmentalized, with different people knowing different pieces. Most of us were just following orders without understanding the bigger picture. And now we're trying to rebuild. The new command structure is cleaning house, removing anyone with connections to the conspiracy. It's going to take time, but we'll get there. As the elevator doors opened, Chen stepped forward. "Captain, I don't know what your plans are, but I want you to know that you'll always have allies in the service. What you did took courage, and that doesn't go unnoticed." The words meant more than he could know. In the aftermath of betrayal and conspiracy, knowing that good people still existed in the system was the only thing that kept her faith alive. The decision came to her as she stood on the roof of the facility, watching the sun set over the Virginia landscape. She had spent her entire adult life in the military, building a career that had defined her identity. But that career was based on trust, and trust had been shattered by the conspiracy she had exposed. The investigator found her there an hour later, her decision already made. "I'm staying," she said without preamble. "Captain, that's not advisable. The threat level." "I'm not running," she interrupted. "I'm a soldier, and soldiers don't run from threats. If they want me, they can come and get me. The protection we can provide in civilian life is not the life I want to live. I'll take my chances with the military." The investigator studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Your choice, but you won't be returning to your previous assignment. The entire unit is being disbanded and reassigned." "I understand." "You'll be transferred to a new unit, new identity, new assignment. Officially, Captain Nick Thorne died in that helicopter crash. The person who survived will need a new name, new records, new everything. The transformation was complete and absolute. Within 48 hours, Captain Nick Thorne ceased to exist in official records. In her place appeared Captain Alina Cross, a pilot with an impeccable record and a mysterious past that no one was authorized to investigate. The new identity came with a new assignment, test pilot for experimental aircraft at a classified facility in Nevada. It was prestigious duty, the kind of assignment that promising pilots competed for. But it was also exile, a way of keeping her away from operational units where her knowledge might prove dangerous. The flight to Nevada gave her time to process everything that had happened. She had saved Delta 7, exposed a conspiracy, and preserved national security. But she had also lost her identity, her career, and her faith in the system she had served. The aircraft she would be testing were unlike anything she had flown before. Advanced designs that pushed the boundaries of physics, incorporating technologies that were decades ahead of anything in operational service. It was challenging work, the kind of assignment that would have thrilled her under different circumstances. But she was not the same person who had taken off from Afghanistan 6 months ago. The betrayal had changed her, hardened her, taught her that trust was a luxury she could not afford. She flew the experimental aircraft with professional competence, but her heart was elsewhere. The other pilots in the unit were curious about the new arrival, but they were also professional enough not to ask too many questions. In the world of classified aircraft and secret missions, everyone had stories they could not tell. "Cross," the squadron commander said during her first briefing, "you come highly recommended. Your file shows exceptional skill in combat operations." "Thank you, sir. But I'm told you're here for reasons that aren't entirely voluntary. Personal problems." "You could say that. Well, we all have our demons. The important thing is that you can do the job. Can you do the job?" "Yes, sir." "Good, because the work we do here is vital to national security. The aircraft you'll be testing will determine the future of American air superiority." The work was indeed vital, but it was also isolating. She flew alone, tested systems that no one else could operate, and wrote reports that disappeared into the classified archives. It was important work, but it was also lonely work. The experimental aircraft she flew were marvels of engineering, incorporating stealth technology, advanced avionics, and propulsion systems that defied conventional physics. But they were also dangerous, pushing the limits of what was possible with current technology. She lost her first aircraft 6 months into the assignment when an experimental engine design failed during a high-speed test. The ejection seat saved her life, but the aircraft was destroyed in the resulting crash. The investigation found no pilot error, but she still felt responsible for the loss. "It's not your fault," the chief engineer told her during the debriefing. "These are experimental systems. Failure is part of the learning process. Tell that to the taxpayers who funded it. The taxpayers fund us to push boundaries. Sometimes that means accepting losses." The philosophy was sound, but it did not ease the guilt. She had been trained to bring aircraft home, to complete missions successfully. Losing an aircraft felt like personal failure, regardless of the circumstances. The second aircraft was even more advanced, incorporating technologies that seemed to belong in science fiction rather than reality. But it was also more dangerous, requiring skills that pushed her to the limits of her abilities. The test flight that changed everything began as a routine evaluation of the aircraft's stealth capabilities. She was flying at high altitude, testing the aircraft's radar signature against the most advanced detection systems available. The flight was proceeding normally when the anomaly occurred. The aircraft's stealth system began to malfunction, creating electromagnetic disturbances that interfered with her communication equipment. She found herself flying an aircraft that was invisible to radar, but also unable to communicate with ground control. Nevada Base, this is Test 7. I'm experiencing communication difficulties. How copy? The response was static. The stealth system was not just hiding the aircraft from enemy radar, it was hiding it from friendly radar as well. She was alone in the sky, flying an aircraft that officially did not exist. The situation deteriorated rapidly as the stealth system began to affect other aircraft systems. Navigation equipment failed, followed by backup communication systems. Within minutes, she was flying an aircraft that was invisible, silent, and completely isolated from the outside world. The irony was not lost on her. She had spent months in exile, isolated from the military community she had once been part of. Now she was literally isolated, flying an aircraft that existed in a bubble of electromagnetic silence. But isolation had taught her self-reliance, and self-reliance was exactly what she needed now. The aircraft was still flyable, its basic systems unaffected by the stealth malfunction. She could navigate by visual reference, return to base using landmarks and dead reckoning. The flight back to base became a journey of self-discovery. Alone in the cockpit, with no radio contact and no electronic assistance, she was forced to rely on the fundamental skills that had made her a pilot. Navigation by compass and map, altitude control by feel, landing approach by visual reference to the runway. It was flying in its purest form, the kind of aviation that had existed before radar and radio, before electronic systems and computer assistance. It was also the kind of flying that had originally attracted her to aviation, the intimate connection between pilot and aircraft. The landing was perfect, a textbook approach that brought the experimental aircraft to a stop exactly on the runway centerline. As she shut down the engines, she felt a satisfaction that had been missing from her flying for months. "Cross," the tower controller said as she taxied to the hangar, "we lost you on radar for the entire flight. What happened up there?" "System malfunction," she replied. "The stealth system created electromagnetic interference that affected communications." "Copy that. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, better than fine, actually." The comment was more revealing than she had intended. For the first time since the conspiracy in Afghanistan, she felt like she was doing something that mattered. The experimental aircraft was not just a machine. It was a symbol of American technological superiority, a tool that would help protect the country she had sworn to defend. The debriefing that followed was more extensive than usual, with engineers and technicians eager to understand what had gone wrong with the stealth system. But they were also interested in her experience flying the aircraft without electronic assistance. "You flew for 2 hours without radio contact," the lead engineer said. "Most pilots would have declared an emergency and returned immediately." "I considered it," she replied. "But the aircraft was performing well, and I wanted to complete the test mission." "That was risky. Without communication, we couldn't provide assistance if something went wrong." "Sometimes you have to rely on your training and your instincts. Electronic systems fail, but pilot skills are always available." The comment sparked a discussion about pilot training and electronic dependence that lasted well into the evening. But it also marked a turning point in her relationship with the unit. She was no longer just the mysterious pilot with the classified past. She was a professional who had proven herself under pressure. The months that followed brought new challenges and new aircraft. Each test flight pushed the boundaries of what was possible, exploring technologies that would define the future of aviation. But they also brought something else, a sense of purpose that had been missing since Afghanistan. She was still Elena Cross, the identity created to protect her from the enemies she had made. But she was also something more, a pilot who had proven that human skill and determination could overcome any obstacle, electronic or otherwise. The call came at 300 hours on a Tuesday morning in spring. Alina was sleeping in her quarters when the phone rang, its harsh tone cutting through the desert silence. Emergency calls at this hour usually meant aircraft accidents or security breaches, neither of which were pleasant prospects. "Cross," she answered, her voice instantly alert. "Captain, this is operations. We need you in the briefing room immediately. Full gear, classified mission." The urgency in the voice was unmistakable. Alina dressed quickly, her mind racing through the possibilities. In 18 months of test flying, she had never been called for an emergency mission. The experimental aircraft were valuable, but they were not operational assets. The briefing room was filled with people she had never seen before: military officers, civilian contractors, and technical specialists, whose presence suggested something far more complex than a routine test flight. The aircraft schematics displayed on the main screen showed a design she had never seen before. "Ladies and gentlemen," the briefing officer began, "this is Operation Shadowfall. 6 hours ago, an American reconnaissance aircraft was shot down over hostile territory. The pilot is alive but trapped behind enemy lines. Conventional rescue assets cannot reach her without triggering a larger conflict." The map on the screen showed a region that Alina recognized, the same area where she had been shot down 2 years earlier. The coincidence was too perfect to be accidental, and she began to understand why she had been called. "The pilot's name is Major Sarah Chen," the briefing officer continued. "She's been conducting surveillance of a terrorist training facility when her aircraft was struck by a surface-to-air missile. She's currently hiding in the mountains, but enemy forces are closing in." Alina studied the tactical display, noting the enemy positions and the terrain features that would affect a rescue mission. The situation was almost identical to her own experience, but with one crucial difference: there was no conspiracy this time.